From southern Rhodesia, from well, what's now Zimbabwe, you moved to Nigeria. What are you doing in Nigeria? Why did you?
Well,
you were unhappy in southern Rhodesia, but
I was actually happy just before I left because I was teaching English on an Anglican mission station, and I found that I just loved it. I liked the students. I enjoyed what I was doing. It was lovely countryside. My life in itself, my own personal life, was in a complete mess, and I think in a way it was a kind of I could become almost a recluse when I was teaching there. I moved into a different world. And I suddenly realised one day that I had to get back into art. And I bought the Times Educational Supplement, the MA edition, and I had the first one in my hand. And there was a priest from Southern Africa, a black priest from Southern Africa, sitting next to me in the staff room. And I opened this up and he said, "What are you going to do when you leave this sort of teaching?" And I looked down and I saw a job in the Ahmadu Bello University in Nigeria in charge of art history. And I said, "I'd like to go there, do that job." And it was the job I got. It's another example of the most incredible luck. I wasn't trained as an art historian. I'd done quite well at art history at the Slade and what we'd done with Ernst Gombrich. But I wasn't trained as such. I had no qualification in art history, but they were quite happy. And I became an art historian and then dedicated myself to research there and teaching, which I don't regret, and it was a very extraordinarily interesting part of my life.
But you weren't doing much artwork yourself at that time?
The first year I did, I was painting pictures which were very strongly English. And then the more research I did, the less painting I could do. And in the end, I did nothing. I was just finishing my thesis.
And was the art history you were teaching, was this a European-centred art history, or did you look more widely at, indeed, at African art as well?
Well, I taught a course of a survey of world art, which I went on teaching in England. And every year it was autumn that the slides were added to and changed, which I enjoyed tremendously. And the object there was to give these students a broad idea of world art, to introduce them to Chinese and Indian and as well as European art and so on. And then the second year, something which nobody bothered to teach, I think probably partly because there was very little reference, and that was a whole year on African art. So I taught about Ife and Zimbabwe and stone sculpture in Africa and wall painting and so on. That was wonderful. And I had enough illustrations so the students for each separate lecture could make a sheet of drawings. And I was tremendously happy about that course, and I think they were, because these were students who came from places that I was talking about. I had students from Ife and Igboku, and students from the north, of course, where I was teaching and so on. And as I've said in the catalogue quote, a student come to me after the lecture and said, that's where I live, what you were talking about, just down the road from me. There are archaeologists there. And the next week you go down there, talking to them and saying, I know what you're doing. It was tremendously exciting, I'm sure, for them.
And for you, I mean, I suspect, I mean, if you're anything like me, then the experience of teaching is one where, as far as the students are concerned, you're teaching them, but as far as you're concerned, you're learning a lot from them.
Oh, yes.
And they're tremendously stimulating. What do you think you took away from that time of teaching in Africa, from the students?
I find it very difficult to say much about what I took from anything. I've talked about life drawing, how it's come through into my figure sculpture and so on. But you ask me, what did I get from the experience in Africa? That's an impossible task for me, really. I know that it's given me the strength to paint that picture I'm looking at on the wall there.
This is the three
stupas, which is a reference to something which is Asiatic, but which also owes a great deal to Africa. And I suppose if looking at it now for the first time, I think I realise that it might be related to Ghanaian textiles, for instance. Michelle would probably recognise that. I don't know whether you do. Do you see any African influence there?
I think, yeah, definitely in colours and that vivid kind of patterns of the colours.
Yes.
It's very quite African. You can see that coming through, I think.
And I was in fact doing a detailed study of house embroidery, which is of course involved with colour. But to be specific, no. And it was quite interesting when I came back and I was painting in the first three years. And people would come into the house and say, "Oh, my word, isn't that African?" And I'd say, "What is African about it? I would quite like to know myself what it is that is African about something." I can see something generally that's the colour, perhaps the strength of the way things are put together. But apart from that, no, it's very difficult.
I wonder how far, though, the study of and the enjoyment of textile work, embroidery and so on, has worked its way through into a kind of way of seeing the picture space that you make in painting as well. I mean, if I look at the painting that's just over to your right here, which is Sculpture Park, is that right? Yes. And Sculpture Park, it's not very difficult to imagine that as a kind of applique textile work, with lots of the threads showing. It's got that. It has something of that same kind of quality of the way in which the image is put together in the space.
Yes, I can see that. Yes, I know there was a certain amount of pleasure in being able to create variations of patterns, which for me were still somehow sculptural, but may well have some origin of some sort in those fabrics that I collected. I did collect quite a lot. There was a whole range of embroidered things, over 100, which have now gone to the British Museum. So it was quite a substantial amount of material.
Would you just like to say a little bit more about the difference between a pattern which is a drawing and a pattern which is sculptural?
I don't think I can say anything about it at all. It's, and I think I'm going to be very quick to that. But for me, that was a sculpture park, and those are some sculptures made during the 20th century were in fact patterned. David Smith, at the end, towards the end of his life, would have these sheets of metal, and he would paint them in. I wasn't thinking of David Smith, but something like these pink marks here. And in fact, there was a curator who got a hold of some of these sculptures and cleaned off these marks that David Smith went. They were quite extraordinary. They were, in a sense, unsculptural, but at the same time, they were, for David Smith, they were relevant and important, as they are for me. I'm sure that if I sat and had to give you an answer to that question you've just given me, I could come up with it. But I don't, when I'm working and I'm living with my things, I'm not exactly putting things into words. So sometimes when I'm asked a question, it's extremely difficult to switch from that world to the world of writing.
So it's more to do with articulating a kind of structure of feeling that you have.
Absolutely, yes.
I think there's a moral there for all gallery directors, Robert.
Absolutely.
Yes, don't clean up the work too basically.